this is the platform debate, and there's been lots of debate in the digital world around owned and operated versus distributed, and I think we have a really great panel today that's going to hopefully duke it out over these topics. My name is Marissa Nelson. I'm the Senior Managing Director for CBC Local Services in Ontario. So I'm going to introduce our moderator, Erika Tustin, who has been in the media world for more than 10 years. Many of those 10 years I've worked with her. Currently, she's the VP of Content at Dipley, which is a lifestyle media property, if you don't know it. And it's been recognized as one of the fastest growing tech companies in Canada. Before that, she worked at the Toronto Star and Torstar for a long time in leadership positions, including Director of Distribution Platforms and Director of Content Strategy. So without further ado, Erika, come on up.
Am I on? Okay. Thanks so much, Marissa. Marissa was my boss at one point in time, so we have worked going back quite so many years together, so that's great. I want to say good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for coming to the platform debate session. Again, my name is Erika Tustin. I'm the VP of Content at Dipley.com, and we're a ComScore North America top 10 lifestyle media property. As Marissa mentioned, I've been in the business for about 10 plus years, working primarily at Torstar for the last 10 years in different capacities, as well as the Director of Distribution Platforms, hence a topic close to my heart, as well as the Director of Content Strategies. We have a big topic to unpack here today and not a lot of time. I want to get to the point where I'm introducing the panel. The topic here today, the platform debate, it's one that's increasingly and urgently timely to the industry as publishers, whether they be large or independent, legacy or non-legacy. They seek to sustain sustainable business models in an ecosystem complicated by the duopoly, algorithms, and a strained advertising market. As I said, we've got a lot to unpack and not a lot of time, so I want to introduce the panel to kick things off, and we'll leave time at the end for questions. So introducing first to my left is Richard Kanee, the Executive Director, Digital Strategy for the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. Richard has led digital strategy and business development for media brands, including Much Music and CTV, and has pioneered many cross-platform successes across broadcast, interactive television, web, mobile, and live events. Prior to joining the CBC, he founded the award-winning Creative D, Inc., which developed new content distribution experiences for Tier 1 media companies, such as Warner Music, Comedy Central, Fox, and Disney. To Richard's left and in the middle is David Skok, also a former colleague of mine and a Ryerson alum. We were in the same class together. He is a strategist, technologist, journalist, editor, and leading thinker on digital transformation in media. He's currently the CEO and editor-in-chief of The Logic, a subscription news site focused on the innovation economy. Prior to founding The Logic, he was the associate editor and head of editorial strategy at the Toronto Star. He was also the managing editor and vice president of digital at the Boston Globe. Under his leadership at the Globe, BostonGlobe.com digital subscriptions grew by 40%, and its page views and digital revenue both tripled. Previously, David was the co-creator and director of digital for Global News, where he launched and built globalnews.ca. He's also a former Harvard Nieman Fellow. And last but not least, Cam Gordon, the head of communications for Twitter Canada and part of Twitter's global communications team. Cam works with journalists across Canada, keeping them informed of the latest happenings with Twitter and sharing Canadian Twitter stories in politics, sports, entertainment, and other areas. Prior to Twitter, Cam spent more than 10 years working for two of Canada's most well-respected communications firm, Hill & Knowlton Strategies and High Road Communications. So let's just give a quick round of applause for our panelists and for them dedicating their time today. Thank you. So I'm going to take a seat just because I keep looking over my shoulder here, but I'd like to start off with addressing the question very deliberately asked in the title of this session. Are the platforms the news industry's savior? Richard, I'm going to throw this to you first, being closest to me. How does the public broadcaster consider platforms in its strategy?
Sure. Platforms are a critical part of the CBC's digital strategy, but by no means the core part of CBC's digital strategy. And what I mean by that is we look at distributed platforms as an opportunity for us to reach new audiences and introduce ourselves to new audiences in our brand and our content. But we know that that loyalty and we know that deep engagement doesn't really happen on those platforms, and that's why it's critically important for us to continue to invest in our owned and operated spaces and make those amazing audience experiences in and of themselves. That's where loyalty is going to happen for us. I'd go one step further and just say that it's a dangerous thing to premise your entire business model on a single partner with whom you have no contractual obligations, and they have no contractual obligations to you. There's a long history in digital media of companies trying that and getting crushed because ultimately they have their own interests at heart, which is fine and it's great. They should, right? That's their shareholders have that expectation of them. But if you don't have a contract with somebody, they can change their mind tomorrow. And if your whole business model is based on what they did yesterday, you're kind of in trouble.
So, David, as an independent publisher, just having moved into that space recently, what are your views on platforms and how do they fit within your business model?
They don't. I view them as purely kind of to what Richard is mentioning as top of the funnel acquisition tools. I don't view them as anything other than that. I used to in other roles where we had a brand that we had already established at the Globe or at Global News or at the Toronto Star. But when you're starting something from scratch, really these platforms are no different to me than any other marketing vehicle out there, whether it's broadcast or offline channels. So for me, the platforms are advertising vehicles. They will be treated as such. We will, get our click-throughs and conversions through them like anybody else would. But I'm in no way treating them as purveyors or places where we're going to do our journalism in a big way. Others have that luxury, but I also think others have fallen victim to shifting their content or editorial strategies as a result of viewing those platforms as more than just advertising platforms.
And to the detriment, I would assume.
To the detriment of society at this point, I would say. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure.
That's a very controversial statement. I want to kind of unpack that a bit more.
So, I mean, I've said this many times at this point that there's a direct link between what happens in the boardroom and what happens in the newsroom. And for the longest time, we ignored that was the case. We had the privilege of ignoring that was the case because we had fire trucks of money being dropped off at our doorstep through advertising. Once the advertising receded, whether it was through national agencies and clippings, through Walmart or anything else, or through Google and Facebook and others taking that advertising, but mostly Google and Facebook, we kind of were left to see the rot that we had created, which is that we had essentially created a journalism ecosystem that relied or was dependent on eyeballs. And that was a subconscious decision made by editors to reach their targets as a result of the motivations of the executives. I mean, it's funny. If I had said that 5 or 10 years ago, people would have thought I was a polemic and a crazy person. I can say it today, and I don't think there's anybody in this room who would actually disagree with me on that.
And so when you say that publishers relied on eyeballs to meet their targets, arguably then those eyeballs were at the whim of the algorithms of the platforms, and therefore does that kind of circle back to your comment around it being to the detriment of society in the way that we publish a ton of great content on a daily basis from different perspectives, and that reaching that reader and providing all those different perspectives became a more challenging thing?
I'll actually be kind to the platforms in this and say it predates the platforms by 140, 150 years, in that fundamentally when you had a newspaper 150 years ago, you had space in between the ads that you needed to fill. And so that was 30 pages, it was 40 pages of whatever. And in doing so, you had to create, I'll say specifically, deliberately, content to fill the space in between the ads. And so when we migrated onto digital platforms, whether it was first the portals, the AOLs or CompuServes of the world, where we had to fill the space between the big box and banner ads, or when it was subsequently SEO and search, where you had to figure out how to write the right keywords in order to get traction and traffic, or then subsequently platforms. Really, there's a consistent thread there, which is none of these eras of our journalism world were really thinking about the readers. And that is what I mean by to the detriment of society, in that journalism that isn't focused on fundamentally serving its users or its readers is not, to me, actually journalism. It's serving your advertisers. And so that's where the link goes. But it's not necessarily just the platform companies that we can... I don't think it's fair to say it's the fault of the platform companies. I think it's a systemic problem with the model that we created 150 years ago.
I definitely want to get back to the reader, and we'll circle back on that with everybody on the panel, but I want to get over to Cam here in the way that he's our representative from the platform, from Twitter Canada.
A brave representative.
And so kind of different question for you, Cam, in the way that, from your perspective and given what you know of these fine folk here and conversations you have with journalists on a pretty consistent basis, what is the role of the platform today kind of versus what it was when it first emerged, and how has that influenced and evolved your relationship with publishers?
Yeah, I've been with Twitter about 3 years now, or actually 3 years to the day, strangely. And in those 3 years, I've really seen a convergence of how we work with media. So I'm going to use, elections in Ontario currently as an example. Whereas when I started in 2015, live video on Twitter was not a thing. There was Vine, I'm sure a lot of you remember, little 6-second looping videos, just weird 30-second crappy cell phone videos at concerts, stuff like that would kind of pop up once in a while. Now, smash cut to present day, something like, Ontario election, we're about to have our third debate on Sunday. It's going to be live streaming on Twitter, CBC. TV Ontario is going to be carrying it. The earlier debates, CP24 had some stuff. City News, we were deeply integrated and gave them some even data. We were in the newsroom helping out with some stuff. CTV live streamed it. So it's just sort of coming together where it's more, when I started, we used to use it, and this is a really sort of bad marketing term. I never cared for it, but that's me. A second screen experience where your primary screen would be a TV, or I suppose even the hard copy of the Globe and Mail or the New York Times, and you're tweeting about what you read in the news or see on TV, or even if you're at a live sporting event or something. Now it's coming together where stuff that is news, like a debate, is actually on platform with the tweets. It's just a tighter experience. And in my opinion, it's also we're investing in people like news partnership people. So my colleague Jennifer Hollett, who works very closely with a number of Canadian news companies, on whatever integration makes sense, being really collaborative, and also how her and I work together. We've gone into newsrooms, meeting with journalists, almost an Ask Me Anything. We haven't been here for 6 months. What do you want to know about where Twitter's at? And just being open and collaborative. I'd love to say what Facebook and Google have to say about the same topic, but at least for us, I think to Twitter's credit, sorry, I jam my mic, that they're investing in people in markets where we kind of have autonomy, do what makes sense for your market. Jen, news partnerships, Cam, communications, you guys know your markets, do what you think makes sense in terms of your respective roles, but also what you think that market needs. I think it's the fourth time I've mentioned her name, but I think Jen was a brilliant hire as someone who both comes from the digital world, but also traditional media, and just had a lot of touch points. And I think she's really kind of taken things to the next level.
So as you work with publishers, say on the Ontario election, you want to create what is essentially a fulsome content package that, to your point, includes video and the context around the video and authoritative tweets and discussion coming from the Twitter sphere at large. What's the value exchange for the publisher in that? What are some of when you're kind of entertaining into those discussions, how do you position the value exchange to the publisher, and what is the publisher asking for? I
think there are, depending on the publisher, they're asking for different things. Some it's, I think maybe at times more of a marketing exercise. It's, our voices, people in our newsroom, our key reporters, elevating their profile, and, you see people, people like Daniel Dale have just kind of gone to a next level, but that's a lot of his efforts too. So it's stuff like that, and then sometimes it is more just kind of a pivot, a distribution of here's a salacious headline, and we'll click on this and go back to our website. And some publishers are still like that, and that's a totally valid reason too. So it just depends, but again, more and more in the last 3 years, I've definitely seen a tighter integration where that impetus to get off Twitter and go elsewhere, whatever that is, Or even, sometimes we'll see they'll tweet to their Facebook Live, whatever it is, wherever they're trying to get people. There does seem to be less of an impetus that I've seen from Canadian media companies, and actually we can do this within the Twitter ecosystem. And I'm sure Facebook and Google would say similar things in terms of YouTube live streaming and Facebook stuff. Yeah. I mean, that's what I've seen.
The question becomes, to your point, what's the value exchange? And I think for a long time, media companies were driven to engage with platforms out of a need to demonstrate innovation to shareholders. We got to be trying things. We got to be learning things, and that drove a lot of second screen experiences, a lot of lurching, in my experience, towards things. There are brands that built themselves on third-party distributions, and if you're a new brand starting out, you kind of need it, but that's kind of a marketing activity. The third question, which is hey, and Twitter's moving that direction, Facebook's moving that direction, YouTube's been there for a long time, is, hey, we're a publishing platform. We're actually a content platform. And that's where things kind of haven't quite played out in terms of a balanced value exchange. If you want me to create content for your platform, there's kind of a standard way that works. You kind of pay me for it, right? So that promise of other something at the end of the rainbow, I think that illusion is starting to dissolve. I think the chasing innovation is starting to dissolve as we're seeing, profitability for Twitter. Congratulations, that's huge. But record profitability for Facebook. It's okay, that's all on our backs. So let's balance the value exchange, or I'll just use you as a marketing platform, to your point.
Well, the other interesting thing about that is you're really talking about, there's a whole economic impetus behind it, which is you have the vertical integration of cable companies on the one hand.
Right.
And then you have these independent digital economy, big tech players on the other hand, and they're kind of vying for the content. And you're seeing it. I mean, Netflix just surpassing Disney yesterday in their share price is a good example of that. So you almost, and I'm just thinking about this now, you can't really have this conversation without looking at the deeper or wider lens, pushing back and saying, okay, well, what is in it for Bell Globe Media to be on an independent digital platform versus being a part of the Bell FIBE cable universe, right?
And we're kind of beyond the phase of, well, you got to be there. It just doesn't cut it the way that it did 5 years ago. Now, that said, they're incredibly powerful reach tools. And if you want to use it as a marketing tool, you have to use it organically and authentically, which means that it's essentially a content marketing activity. You need to post natively, but what's the end game? That's the question I think that as every media company, we need to be much more sharply focused on is what's the objective at the end of the day, because if it's just to report how many Twitter followers you have, that's not value creation for anybody except Twitter.
Yeah. And I'd argue number of Twitter followers is not necessarily indicative of anything.
Yeah.
I hate to say, I probably shouldn't be saying that, but it's not like kind of the silver bullet indicator of health or value at all, in my opinion.
So just to summarize slightly, in a sense, I think we can say that there's consensus around platforms being, a fair exchange of value for marketing and brand awareness for publishers, businesses, and various entities. To that end, if that's, their primary usefulness, let's say, or their value exchange at this moment, building audience and engagement is still something that publishers need to be focused on in order to sustain growth, to drive revenue, all those things that we're all trying to solve for at the end of the day. So I'm interested to hear from yourself, Richard, and David. What are you employing? What tactics? What is your roadmap in order to achieve that kind of sans that distribution arm outside of brand awareness and marketing?
Yeah, so if you're marketing, you need to be marketing something. And that's, I think, sort of the other great failing to date of media in the broadest sense of media, which is not really paying attention to the other most important thing. Yes, story is the most important thing in the work that we do. The other most important thing in the digital work we do is the audience experience, and that's about product. And that's about creating great products that actually solve real audience needs respond to audience behaviors in an authentic way, and create some surprise and delight. And I would argue that the online publishing industry really hasn't evolved since somebody had, from a product perspective, until somebody had the insight of taking the broadsheet experience and moving it online. And the broadsheet experience is an incredibly isolated thing. It's me with my paper and my coffee. But we know what drives growth in the digital medium. That media itself is a social thing. And so we need to look deeper beyond a place where I publish my articles and videos to find out what is that experience around media that I can own and create for the CBC, the largest Canadian-owned audience in Canada. Our question is, what is that experience we can create for Canadians that's not just about publishing content, but about creating a deep engagement and loyalty and connection between each other and to us, the CBC.
So I agree with everything you just said, and would just to add to that, I think what's really important for us is thinking about the owned and operated piece, as you said. It is fundamental. I can build those relationships online. I can build those experiences and that engagement, and I should through my journalism, through our interaction and feedback loop with our customers and readers. But ultimately, I want to hold that data because I want to protect them in that sense. The one question, I mean, just to play contrarian a little bit on the CBC's part of this, which confuses me, is that I don't. The CBC is supposed to be the open web of Canada, effectively, and so the idea of an an owned and operated sensibility of coming back to the CBC's websites or coming back to the space of the CBC has always been something that's perplexed me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because as the open web of the country, being on all these platforms, it would seem like you would be the one place that doesn't have the same considerations around owned and operated and having the monetization ability of the readers.
So that's not about value driving. Well, certainly it's value driving, but I think a broader sense. So sadly for my media solutions colleagues in the room, yes, revenue is a secondary objective for the CBC. The virtue of CBC building a strong owned and operated platform is that it will always be the place that serves Canada, full stop. Facebook and Twitter and Google, and many of whom are great partners for us and do care deeply about Canadians, but they're ultimately creating value for foreign stakeholders. And so as that ebbs and flows, and as their objectives are set by a different country's agenda, our hope, our opportunity that we're working towards is to say, how do we make sure that there's always a sovereign space? And then how do we think about that sovereign space from the perspective of plurality of voices? So on a spectrum of platform, it's interesting, and I'm going a little off script, so, but it's interesting to think about CBC as a platform. And what's the opportunity for CBC to continue to open up the circle in terms of the plurality of voices? We have a powerful network, and part of that powerful network needs to be on the distributed platforms. So we're not making choices to remove content from those spaces where Canadians congregate outside of our platform, but what we're saying is you will always have a home. And that home will always be here to serve you primarily, your interests, your needs, and the public service agenda that we serve.
If that's the case, though, then why not open it up to CTV's content or Global News' content or the Logic's content?
I love that question. I love that question. I would say that there's a lot of voices involved in that conversation. But I think I agree with you. I think that's a fascinating question that should be explored as we think about what is the future role of public media.
I feel like you're moving the conversation, David, towards categorizing the CBC as a platform.
Right.
Do we all hear that? Yeah, I heard that.
I mean, I would rather, if the CBC is a platform, I'd be far more open to working and collaborating with CBC and wanting the CBC's distribution and reach without feeling threatened that they were going to steal my dollars than I would, no offense, the gentleman to my left.
Right. Well, let's talk.
I'm here just to do deals.
Fair. So I want to take it back to David, yourself again, one of the comments you made early in the conversation around eyeballs and eyeballs being a metric. I think, over time, publishers have bandied about a number of different ways to measure success within their newsrooms and their organizations. And then I'd love to hear from the platform as well as the publishers here, kind of where are those conversations at right now? And we know we value the reader, but what about that reader do we value? We value their data, what within that data, and if you could kind of break that down for us, I think that'd be really helpful.
So I'm going to now flip to my editorial hat, okay? And Erika, you've heard this because I'm sure I told you when I was at the Star, but we did a package when I was at the Boston Globe. It was an editorial package called Make It Stop, which was about the Pulse nightclub shooting. There was, in Orlando, a lot of people killed, and we made a call through our editorial pages to ban the AR-15 assault weapons. We did several things with that editorial push. We had, obviously, the newspaper front page was used as an editorial, which in itself was controversial. We also had an online presentation on our owned and operated website that was the editorial with visually pleasing things. But then we also used Twitter as a way to tweet out the victim, the name and age of every victim who had died from lifting the assault weapons ban in 2002, I believe, 2003. And then we used Facebook for a video to showcase it. And the point of saying that is to say that, when you can, regardless of whether it's over monetization, owned and operated, or whatever kind of platform it is, I still do fundamentally think that these are wonderfully rich storytelling platforms. And so if you are going to use them, think about them holistically as in ways that allow you to spur a conversation. So that's a long-winded way of answering your question by saying, to me, the metric of success on these platforms, beyond awareness, not actually click-through rates back to our site, I don't care about that, but beyond awareness is, are you able to facilitate a conversation through the reach of these platforms? If you're able to do that, then I think that, to me, is the ultimate success as a journalist.
And I want to turn it over to Cam for a moment here, because Twitter recently made a number of different changes and strides in order to really kind of declutter that conversation that maybe you could elaborate on for us here.
Yeah, I mean, God, where to start? Really on that, because there's been a lot of changes. I mean, like for us, it's a few things. I think you touched on off the start, and this is obviously, a big consideration, kind of these algorithmic, what content is surfacing. So yeah, for us, I mean, kind of the dumbed down version is we want to make sure anyone coming to Twitter for the first time sees the best content. How do we do that? Because we don't want them to leave. We want them to stay on, see the good stuff, even if it came out a while ago. So yeah, I mean, this is, and there's different sort of mechanisms we put in place. I mean, there's stuff in terms of like our live pages, which once upon a time were more like ostensibly like kind of trending. What means a trend on Twitter is different now. You see a trending topic, you click on that. Probably what you're going to see surface is some combination of some video, some commentary, some big voices, maybe some politicians, something like a shooting. You're probably going to see like, I hate to say like shootings, take your pick, any of them. Like recently, local news broadcasts, the CNN live feed, just different broadcasters, big voices, that are getting elevated. So, it's for us surfacing all that through like various back-end signals, a lot of stuff with regard to like engagement, which tweets are really surfacing. So it's that, and it's also stuff like David mentioned, just like media companies are just using Twitter in like very creative ways. Like that example is like a good one. There was one of the Detroit newspapers. They did something very similar with like all that gymnastics coach Larry Nassar.
Oh right. Yeah.
All of his victims, one by one. We see this with companies that aren't news partners. Every once in a while, we'll see like one of the RCMP accounts will actually go into the voice of like a cold case, like, "Hi, I'm this person. I was murdered in 1986. Can you help find my kid?" Almost like I think it was almost inspired by serial type stuff, where they'll like show all these photos, and that can be like really powerful. And often that gets written about. There's one in, I think it was RCMP Winnipeg did something for someone, I believe in like Brandon, Manitoba or something. Stuff like that just gets surfaced, and like not that many people follow RCMP Manitoba, but then that stuff kind of goes viral. People start writing about it, and then, so it's creativity like goes a long way on Twitter, and I think on the other platforms too.
And Erika, you've had more experience than any of us in terms of thinking about this, so you should probably tell us. But I would say, it's important to think of each platform's strengths before you even begin to approach what kind of storytelling you're going to do on them. Twitter's a great, chances of somebody seeing your one tweet are slim to none. Chances of somebody seeing a series of tweets over time are much greater. So, think about that as a drawn-out way of telling a story. Whereas, sorry.
Yeah, and needless to say, I mean, the one way Twitter typically doesn't work if it's just go to our YouTube channel or go to our Facebook page. Like, we even throttle some of that stuff. Like, I'm sure a lot of people in the room are on Instagram, which is cool. But, if you link out to like an Instagram photo, whereas, if you link to Global News or Toronto Star, the actual card will pop up, so it's more visual. You link out to Instagram, you're not getting the card because it's like, you should be posting that photo on Twitter too, So like there are some like mechanical stuff.
And I think to what, everyone's saying here and to a certain capacity is that you have to take the considerations of the platforms and their strengths and weaknesses and measure them against what your corporate priorities are and evaluate whether or not that platform or that channel or whatever you want to call it, whether it's an email campaign, whether or not that actually will align to your corporate strategies and actually provide profit and growth.
And actually, sorry, can I just mention one other thing we've done recently, which has been a bit of a challenge for us is, and this is in our effort to combat kind of like the broad distribution of like misinformation too, which obviously like its own session, like clearly. But some of you like work on the back end have noticed we've actually changed where you can't tweet out the same content from like multiple owned and operated handles.
Right.
In an effort to combat that, which had nothing to do with publishers, but was more like, a kind of a misinformation tool from other accounts. But now, all our news partnership people are working with publishers. Like, how do we deal with this new reality? And again, it's a mechanical thing. So.
Thank you for that. And Richard, I want to give you an opportunity to say your comment, and then we'll throw it over to questions.
I just wanted to sort of double down on the relationship between the storytelling and the platform and how fascinating I find that. And because every one of these is literally like the medium defines the message, right? Like if that's Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram, Friendster, and it's that creative exercise of what are the set of tools that I have and how can I tell the story the best way with those tools is absolutely fascinating. And so regardless of what your objectives are, whether it's generate revenue because you've got a great deal with Twitter or whether it's reaching new audiences, going through that exploration and being really diligent and focused about it is critical. And then I would take it one step further and don't forget that you own your own platform. And you have that ability to ask that question of yourself as well, with the ability to actually affect the context in a way that you can't with Twitter. So when I got to CBC, we spend a lot of time asking what's the best way to format video for Instagram. But I don't think we ask enough, what's the best way to format video for CBC.ca? And that's an untapped opportunity for us because you got product and content guys that can work very hand in glove.
Can I just add 2 points? Just quickly, I keep looking at the title of this, Are the Platforms the News Industry's Savior? And there's a part of it that makes me really cringe. And that is, we as journalists, we are part of the protectors of the Second Amendment here, First Amendment in the United States. Our job is to be those stalwarts for free speech. And I can't help but think over the last 18 months or so, we've seen how platforms have actually created some problems in that area. And I think that we have a journalistic challenge as well when it comes to the platforms. And a call to arms would be to make sure that you're holding them accountable the same way you would a politician, because these platforms are as powerful. Actually, they're far more powerful than any politician in the world today. And then the other thing I would say is I'm curious, have you put in place any sort of block on President Trump so that he cannot block anybody anymore now that the Supreme Court has happened?
It's coming down the pipe, right?
Yeah, I'll just say stay tuned to that.
Anyway,
All right, so not done yet, guys. Want to throw it open to some questions here? We have one over there.
Just a little bit of perspective I come from small market radio, Yukon. The entire territory is 38,000, but we still love our Twitter. From a radio perspective, and it's time related. In the morning for the morning show, I'm posting a minute video teasing our stories, trying to drive people to terrestrial radio, posting web stories, using Twitter, trying to drive stories to our website. I'll actually then delete the video after 9 o'clock, but still trying to drive people to our website. Facebook has already announced that they want to put more emphasis on local news. Does Twitter, this is for Cameron, by the way, does Twitter have that plan to identify an even more local market, newsmakers, radio stations, newspapers, to try and put that higher up in for local users of that, if that's even possible? I mean,
sure, yeah. I mean, obviously, you know, this is first and foremost a resource thing where, you know, where our office is about 45 people. We're mainly a sales office, and then there's a few of us that are teams of one, including myself, including Jen, and some of the other folks who I sit with. So I mean, for that, I think it's a combination of, you know, at the very baseline, you know, kind of some self-serve tools, you know, tip sheets, like Periscope type stuff, live streaming, making a lot of this stuff more native, where, you know, formerly you needed, you know, to throw over this app. It's more integrated. So it's stuff like that. It's also, you know, I would argue it's investing, making sure that we make time to come to events like this, and, like, you know, just being out there, being. It's one thing I think we do really well is we're available, like, all the time. Like, you know, I get like random emails from journalists all over the country just because you can find us. Like, it's, you know, we do a lot of interviews, we do a lot of media. We're very, I think, accessible. I get journalists tweeting at me all the time, and I'll just like, let's go into DM, and we'll chat. You know, ditto for the kind of news partnerships team. So again, like, you know, we'd love to do more of it. It is like a resource thing. But I would say it's like a combination of just being accessible. So if people want to find us, we're out there and we're available. We're not hiding from anything. Yeah. Okay.
Form so that it actually pops up, like for our radio station, The Rush, it'll pop up more for people in Whitehorse.
Oh, okay.
So prioritizing the
Yeah,
content located to geography.
Okay, so now I'll give you like what you actually asked. Yeah, I'll just say regional content and surfacing that algorithmically, yes. It's definitely a priority, whether that's a news organization or a local sports team, local politician. Our goal is to make Twitter more palatable to people anywhere, regardless of where they are, because that's when we do research, that's reason people sign up for Twitter and then don't come back, because they're like, this doesn't speak to me. I live in this place, I like sports, I like food, I like whatever, and the stuff I see there doesn't speak to me. I'm seeing stuff from, you know, other parts of the world that I don't care about. So yeah, algorithmically, and again, it's all sort of back end. It's definitely a big part of the investment, because frankly, if we want more users, they're not going to stick around if they're not seeing stuff that they're interested in, like at a very baseline level.
Well, and it's the same theme that we're discussing here from all publisher or platform, where the user, the reader, the customer, however you want to describe that person, is and should be the focus of what it is that you do, what your product provides, what you create, how you then intend to distribute it and market it. It's different for everyone, but you guys are all kind of saying the same thing at the end of the day, I think. A little bit, maybe not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would not spend as much time as you are personally creating these videos just for Twitter to get people to your site. First of all, that's an ad. I mean, what Cameron isn't saying, and he's very polite, and I know he believes it, but in reality, they'd much rather you pay for an ad to surface at the top than to have them do it algorithmically, whether that's Twitter or Facebook or Google. So understand that going in, it's a marketing platform, so pay for it if you want it, one. Two, it's a walled garden in and of itself, so that's why Facebook wants you there, because Facebook knows as well as anyone that local news is a great driver of ad revenue in certain respects, not to a large extent, but you know, in a way that they want to keep people on their platform. It's wonderful to have you producing stuff there. But the third thing is, and this is purely just a tactical, practical thing, I wouldn't spend so much time, if it were me, trying to get people to come to my website from creating these videos. I would just use those platforms to let people know that you exist, that you're around and have conversations with them. Yeah. And then ultimately, you know, if you do that, they will come to you. But if the videos you're creating are really more of a branding exercise than a journalism exercise, it's probably not the most efficient use of your time.
And notoriously, conversion from radio is essentially impossible. It's just not a product that's kind of meant to drive that behavior, as David's speaking to as well.
For 20 years, having been doing digital for media companies for 20 years. Nobody has ever proven the hypothesis that my website or my digital activity will drive tune in to my linear experience. And so, to your point, build your brand and build your relationships in those spaces, but don't try to convert them out of there. There's only two platforms that matter for audience conversion, like that pure down funnel referral traffic, and one of them is Google, and the other one is Facebook. And for a while, Facebook was more important than Google. Then they decided they'd rather charge you for that referral privilege, and so that game is kind of done. That duopoly in terms of referral traffic, and then you get into a very long tail, and Twitter plays in that long tail. But that again, your audience will sniff that, and you will not connect with them in the authentic way that they're looking for you to in those spaces.
Do we have any other questions? Sorry, I'm kind of hiding behind the panel podium here. Anyone else? No? Okay, great. Well, I want to say thank you to Richard and David and Cameron for joining us today and providing a lot of insight and great engaging conversation, and for Marissa for helping to organize this as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks so much to Erika Tustin, who moderated this panel. We're going to have a coffee break until 3. Then there's 2 more breakout sessions this afternoon I want to make sure you're aware of. One is Audience Metrics 2020, looking ahead to the new revenue models. The second is the future of wire services. Just so you're aware, we are live streaming, and we will post